tremendous consumption of data, most of which currently, candidly, goes over Wi-Fi. But if you look at whether it's Wi-Fi or LTE, you look at the aggregate demand, it is easily doubling every year, which leads us to the 1000X initiative, which means basically in 8 years you'll have 1,000 times the demand you have today. And the ways you get there are obviously more spectrum. That's one thing that we've spoken about, and there's activities in lobbying, at least in the United States and other regulatory bodies, to try to obtain more spectrum. Getting licensed spectrum is the top priority of the 3GPP ecosystem. I don't know if I'm on again. Yeah, so that's obviously the top priority. We looked also at underutilized spectrum. 3.5 came up earlier, and in that case, we're looking at ways to share spectrum both in time, frequency, and in space. What I mean by that, if you look at what's in 3.5, we're trying to share the spectrum with some of the incumbents there, and then they don't occupy it all the time or in all parts of the country, so there are ways that we can do authorized shared access. ASA, and there's activities going on in front of the FCC as well to get use of that spectrum as well. And then there's obviously looking at unlicensed spectrum as a way to obtain more data offload. Then there's also trying to improve the efficiencies in the underlying technology. And there, things are, everybody talks about approaching Shannon's limit, but things are really pretty much getting there. With Wi-Fi, for example, 11AC and 11AX have introduced things like multi-user MIMO, both uplink and downlink, both LTE and Wi-Fi have OFDMA uplink and eventually downlink and uplink implementation. There's interference mitigation, which helps cancel interference from other users and devices. So that's all part of trying to extract higher order modulation, higher order MIMO, and interference mitigation are all ways that both Wi-Fi and LTE are trying to increase the capacity of the underlying technology. But where we think, and you've heard this, and I think this should resonate well, more small cells are the best way to get more capacity out of the system. That's basically spatial reuse. Moving on, and this is kind of where I'm going to try to help set the nomenclature one more time, is that there's LTE Advanced, which is basically what's going on within 3GPP, going through release 13, obviously. Then there's LTE Unlicensed, and underneath there's like 3 areas. There's kind of LTE pre-release 13, sometimes called LTE-U, as opposed to LTE Unlicensed. There's LAA, which is release 13 based, and that includes things like listen before talk implementation. Then there's Multi-Fire, which is a recent Qualcomm initiative, which is basically uplink and downlink in 5 gigahertz concurrently. And then obviously there's the 11, I already spoke to 11AC, AX. AD is a 60 gigahertz initiative, which again is looking at ways to connect things within a home or within short range due to the nature of deploying things at 60 gigahertz. And we see that in particular having some applications and use cases in home connectivity or maybe area connectivity like this, local area connectivity. So that's trying to get more out of all the spectrum that's available. Moving on to the unlicensed 5 gigahertz is ideal for small cells. Well, there's up to 500 megahertz available in 5 gigahertz. Some of it, and obviously 5 gigahertz is unregulated, I should say. It doesn't specify technologies. And right now, obviously, Wi-Fi is in it, or other technologies that are in there. Putting LTE in there requires, obviously, doing some modifications to LTE, which we're putting forth as part of 3GPP, release 13. But if I compare and contrast, one of the reasons why we think LTE has a role in 5 gigahertz is LTE is secure airlink, it's a scheduled airlink, it's a synchronized airlink, it's a airlink with high sensitivities. So those are your 4 S's for LTE that we think give it some advantages in occupying 5 gigahertz as opposed to some other technologies. And also we feel that all these attributes taken together create service differentiation for whether it's an operator using LTE LAA or whether it's a multi-fire kind of standalone operation. The best performance we candidly see is with using LTE-U with an anchor, which is LAA, otherwise known as release 13. We also see, as I mentioned earlier, multi-fire, which would basically eliminate that anchor. and occupy 5 gigahertz both uplink and downlink, would be another variant of that particular implementation. Then you move to 802.11, which obviously occupies 5 gigahertz as well. So all of these, the goal is to make all these coexist by modifying the waveform, in particular with things like listen before talk and other Release 13 capabilities. So, moving on to aggregation, some of the other activities that you've heard about, as opposed to putting LTE or having LTE occupy 5 gigahertz, is aggregating licensed and unlicensed. And there's various ways of doing this with Wi-Fi. One of the ways is to implement to have Wi-Fi at higher layers, to distribute traffic between LTE and Wi-Fi by using IP level segregation. There are other ways going deeper into the modem where you can start segregating traffic. But the point is that you're using the best of the licensed band plus pre-existing Wi-Fi access points to aggregate traffic. And I think the next slide probably does a better job at explaining this, which is, this does a better job at explaining what I was just describing, which is basically using control from LTE to talk to a mobile device, but then distributing the traffic between LTE and Wi-Fi. There are two different variants of this. One is kind of at the higher layer. Another one is a little bit deeper into the modem, which is described here as modem level aggregation. This will bring about better performance than performing it at higher layers. It is a work item, and again, part of Release 13, 3GPP Release 13, and that's kind of going deeper into the stack and being able to distribute traffic between both LTE and Wi-Fi. Again, this is LTE acting and operating within the license band, and Wi-Fi operating at 5 gigahertz. It's just basically distributing traffic according to some predetermined protocols or algorithms. And the advantage here is that you can take advantage of existing access points, but you do get better performance in either one of them operating independently. And we've done some simulations on this. You can read the footnote, which I'm actually having a hard time reading. We actually go into some details on the simulations, and if there's interest in more information on this, we have people who can describe this in considerable detail. We can have discussions. Also, we have demonstrations in San Diego which show these various implementations and actually show the performance differences. Earlier I set the table on LTE and license. In this particular case, you're looking at aggregating, aggregating LTE and 5 gigahertz together with a licensed anchor. And the initial LTE and LAA it's kind of a supplemental downlink implementation, which means that your uplink and downlink are managed on the licensed band. That's anywhere between 400, although in reality, most of the deployments you're looking at are 700, 800, up to 3.8 gigahertz, where you would have the simultaneous uplink and downlink on the license band. That could be either TDD or FDD. Candidly, most of the anchors we're seeing today are based on FDD. And then the supplemental downlink, which is basically just a downlink only in the unlicensed 5 gigahertz band. And that kind of boosts the net throughput to the user. In later phases, we see both carrier aggregation on both uplink and downlink in the unlicensed band. And that's kind of some of the evolutions we see. Again, referring back to why do this and some of the simulations we've run and the networks we've deployed, is that we do see additional spectral efficiency and capacity and range compared to native Wi-Fi. And that goes back to some of the discussion I had earlier about the 4 S's of LTE, which are synchronized, schedule, sensitivity, and security. Well, the last one does really impact capacity and range. It does have an enhanced user experience, and I think that's where the security part would come into play. And this is probably relevant for mobile operators, it gives them a single core network to manage all the traffic. That's one of the things that the Wi-Fi aggregation candidly moves a little bit away from, where if you use Wi-Fi in addition to LTE, you're not taking advantage of the LTE core network on the Wi-Fi side. But things like mobility are better managed through that core network. And again, I have to emphasize this, and we've been very public on trying to make this as a good Wi-Fi neighbor, try to coexist as well as possible. I mean, that's kind of where the activities in Release 13 and some of the pre-activities in a forum are basically focused on. Coexistence is priority number one. And it's a good segue into this next slide, which is there's a minimum set of requirements that are looked at: power emissions levels, listen before talk capabilities, which are required in Europe and Japan and some other markets. But we're looking to go beyond there. So the implementations we're putting in place include CSAT, which is ways to sense the Wi-Fi environment, do things like preamble detection, and be able to determine where Wi-Fi access points are and be able to manage the LTE transmission. So when we say going above and beyond, that's some of the technologies we're implementing, both pre-Release 13 and obviously post-Release 13 with things like listen before talk and other kind of PHY-level implementations. And another thing that should be pointed out is that 3GPP and LTE-U forum, which is a forum that's been created in the United States to bring the technology to market, are heavily engaged with the unlicensed stakeholders, which include the IEEE and Wi-Fi Alliance. So there's a lot of liaising, if there's such a word, between these bodies, between kind of the 3GPP body and the IEEE body. There's a lot of conformance testing that is actually going on. And yesterday, I sat through one of the morning presentations, and somebody showed the Qualcomm conformance lab where we had Wi-Fi access points and LTE access points in one shielded room and doing coexistence and conformance testing. But that's a very important initiative within Qualcomm, is to make sure these things coexist. I think that lab that was shown yesterday, unfortunately I don't have a slide here, but that is an example of some of the conformance and coexistence testing we're doing. And the LTE-U forum, again, as the US body that's working on bringing LTE in the unlicensed band, has specs that have been put out on the website and are public. So there's a lot of work going on to ensure coexistence. Now, as far as making it commercial, this is the product part, which is candidly my domain. Qualcomm obviously is developing chipsets to implement LTE in the unlicensed band. On the access point side, which is otherwise known as a small cell, we're taking our existing commercially available FSM 9955 and implementing LTE with supplemental downlink with a 5 gigahertz radio. And that's all. There's a product out on the floor with one of our partners that actually implements this chipset. I encourage you to come by and look at and talk to our partner and look at the product. That's actually in development right now as a commercial access point. On the UE side, we're likewise implementing 5 gigahertz radios on the UE to provide an end-to-end solution. And taking a step back, that's one of the reasons why Qualcomm is involved with small cells, is to ensure an end-to-end solution to bring innovations like this to market. So I think this is like one of the prime examples I'll point to where we're trying to bring both ends of the solution together and develop both the access point and the mobile device together. And a little more on the small cell side is we announced the LTE-U support. It's the first, as it was the previous slide said, it's the first commercially available LTE-U enabled device for small cells. With some of the other capabilities that we can potentially bring to the table in the future is that there's hosted Wi-Fi or coexistence Wi-Fi on the same platform. I discussed this earlier, CSAT, but that is one of the Qualcomm's coexistence software that will be provided as part of our solution to ensure that there's coexistence. I made reference to that testing lab earlier. That is actually where we developed and tested some of this stuff, and it will be going into the field soon, and we'll be getting field testing on CSAT and other coexistence capabilities. Hotspot 2.0, I just kind of skipped over that earlier. I should have pointed out that, just taking a step back, that both Wi-Fi and LTE are kind of converging in spec, and there are activities occurring within the IEEE world where Hotspot 2.0 emulates a lot of the cellular roaming based on 802.11u, a lot of the cellular roaming capabilities and authentication. So obviously part of the Qualcomm and Atheros chipset families that we implement the 802.11u Hotspot 2.0 capabilities. And finally, for ease of deployment, we have ultrasound, which allows self-organizing, self-aware deployment of small cells. And again, the vision, I think Tariq mentioned this earlier, the vision is to make LTE look like a Wi-Fi small cell where it comes up on its own. So somebody like me can plug in an Ethernet connection and turn it on and not bring in somebody who has a PhD to do radio planning and configuration. The target for all of this, candidly, is the enterprises, venues, and ultimately, with cost reductions, to bring it into the residential, into the homes eventually. It could also be deployed within a neighborhood. There are various outdoor deployment scenarios that involve deploying a long strand mount and other capabilities. That's all part of the eventual vision of morphing the chip into products that get deployed in these environments. That's the goal. Otherwise, if you don't get this stuff out there, there's no point in developing technologies. Okay, so I think this is my final slide. And it tries to summarize everything I poorly said a few moments ago. But there are multiple radio technologies that Qualcomm is actively supporting. And we're trying to bring them all to market in various form factors. There is 802.11ac AD, which is in-home networking, both within products within the home, primarily around AD, and also a mobile device to access point, which are things like AC and AX. So that's part of what we see as the ultimate traffic offload visions. There is the ability to do LTE Wi-Fi call connectivity. That's part of some of the discussion around Wi-Fi and LTE bodies collaborating around things like 802.11u, where you have authentication and eventually call continuity between Wi-Fi and the 3GPP LTE-U. As far as LTE specifically, there's obviously a lot of things occurring with carrier aggregation, which is moving up to 2 and 3 carriers for higher data rates, bringing together up to 60 megahertz, in some cases even higher, up to 80 megahertz. We have LTE and Wi-Fi link aggregation, which I described earlier, which are ways to take advantage of the separate radio nodes on LTE and Wi-Fi and bring them together more at the higher layer within the stack. And finally, there's LTE-U and LAA aggregation, which is basically, again, putting LTE waveforms within 5 gigahertz and aggregating that with an anchor within one of the license bands. So that's kind of the vision of where data can get offloaded. This slide, I think, pretty much captures the various variants that are out there today. So that's all I had, and I'll entertain questions as long as you don't ask about the Mets.